Hello, my name is Anthony Wolenek. I'm part of the ICS 382-50 Spring of 2018 class on computer security at Metro State University. Our instructor is Faisal Kaleem, and as part of the course we are supposed to produce a video about a security vulnerability of some sort and explain how that vulnerability can be exploited. I've chosen a Docker vulnerability for my demonstration, which will have me logging into a Docker container, gaining access to that Docker container, being able to use that Docker container to access the Docker host, and from the Docker host you then have full access to anything else on the box if you have root authority. This video will be going through an example of the Docker vulnerability, but this is strictly for my class learning and for the class that I'm with, for them to be able to review it. This should not be taken as any sort of authoritative video on the subject. It is primarily for a learning experience. There are companies out there that provide security services to other companies. One of those is NotSoSecure.com. NotSoSecure provides penetration testing for companies to be able to penetrate their environments and see what's available to them. They also provide hacking training. Here's their website that you can sign up for penetration testing. You can also sign up for hacking training. If you go here, you can look on. They give you a number of different options for figuring out how to do hacking to be able to be more efficient in your job as a penetration tester. One of the resources provided by NotSoSecure is ways for individuals to learn hacking. Some of these are provided online free of charge for you to use. This one is the vulnerable Docker environment that they have created. This is creating a virtual machine on a VirtualBox that you can install on your own PC. This allows you to create this environment, get it out there and running for you, and then run through this challenge. The Vulnerabledockervm is at this link. You can go out there and download the file from the download right here. As you can see, they have built this in both an easy and a hard mode. For this video, I'll be going through it in the easy mode and explaining the steps along the way for how we got there to where we are. There are some write-ups down here at the bottom of the video that tells you how to go through this in a more complicated manner through the hard mode, and it stands up a WordPress site which allows you to use a WordPress vulnerability to get access to the Docker container. Several more steps involved to go through it. I will be handling the easy mode here for this video. One of the additional questions you may have as we get started here is, what is Docker? Docker is the prevalent container platform in infrastructure today. Containers are a newer way to break up virtual machines. Containers have been around for a long time, but they've really become more available in infrastructure as a simple way to stand up an application environment. In the past, you'd have a physical server. That physical server you would stand up the physical machine and get that all working. And then they started transitioning to virtual machines. Virtual machines allow you to stand up several smaller machines on a larger machine, taking advantage of breaking that up into smaller pieces to give individuals a smaller piece of that large machine as a way to run their applications. Docker is a way to virtualize a virtual machine into smaller components. That gives you a container you run on that server, on that virtual server, that allows you to run like an individual application. You can run many containers on a virtual machine, and they take up very small resources. This is a way to allow you to build your application and then give your prerequisites, get all your prerequisites together, get that all stood up, and those prerequisites will allow you to have your entire environment there. So if you have Java and you need to stand up Java but you need a Tomcat server to run the application, Docker allows you to pre-install Tomcat there, then install Java, and then run your application and have all those pieces in place instead of having to work through each of those individual environments. Docker's website is here. It has a lot of documentation out there for how Docker works and all the different environments out there. You can sign up and get into it. The more important thing I wanted to point out is Docker Hub. Docker Hub is where all those different environments are located. So if you decide you want to run a CentOS environment and you need a Linux server for a very small environment to run things in and get things running, you can come out here and get CentOS. CentOS is a Linux-based operating system. If you decide you need a very small one, Alpine is out there. Alpine is a very small Linux environment that allows you to have a very small footprint, which is very typically used in Docker containers, once you have the Docker container working, you use Alpine to make sure you have a very small environment for a very small footprint. There are things like Java. If you need to go with Java 8, you can search for Java 8. It brings up Java 8. This one is Java 8 with Tomcat pre-installed on it. This is a mini Java environment for a smaller footprint as well. Different application pieces you can put together. This next slide talks about the architecture for a Docker environment. You have your Docker client, and that is your CLI, your command line interface. This is where you're able to execute Docker commands to pull down those images, run images, stand up different things, log into your Docker containers. The Docker host in the middle, that is where you actually have your Docker server running. This is the Docker daemon running that controls the containers. This allows you to stand up multiple Docker containers in an environment and have them running out there to perform different functions. The Docker registry on the right is where you get your images from. That is where I was just showing you on hub.docker.com. That is a place where you can go and pull out an image for, CentOS or Java or whatever base image you need to actually build this together. The host then pulls that image down, runs that image, gets it stood up. An image is a Docker container that is waiting to be run. A container is a Docker image that is running. What I will be doing is using the Docker client commands to access a container that is running, use that container to gain access to the host as the root ID on the host. When you have root ID on the host, you can gain access to any of those containers that are running. And that is the exploit that I'm going to walk through as part of this video. This is the part of the video that gets very exciting. We have our VirtualBox on the left over here, and we're going to use this to actually begin our hacking example. We're going to stand up our Docker VirtualBox, then we'll use a container on that box to gain access to the container. From the container, we'll gain root access to the virtual machine. And from there we have the virtual machine root, so we could be able to get anywhere on that virtual machine and attack the other containers as well. If you look over from our VirtualBox is stood up. VirtualBox allows me to run other images on my machine, and I have downloaded that vulnerable Docker image available here. The vulnerable Docker image, I'll double click on that. That will bring up my other window. I have to get into here quickly and go to the easy mode, otherwise it defaults to hard mode. And that requires you to go through a much more complicated process. I'll show you a little bit of that, but not entirely how that process works. If you want to look more into that process, please feel free to go to that earlier link I provided. That tells you all about the hard process. You can see that the IP address of the virtual machine that has been stood up here is 10.0.0.70. That's also up in my slides because I've already stood this up before to prepare for this video. And the IP address is up there, so we'll use that as our place to attack. Now that we have the Docker virtual image stood up, the vulnerable host that was provided, we get the IP address here in the background. This is 10.0.0.70. This IP address is stood up. You can see my slides. It's the same IP. It'll come up as the same IP as you're working through this several times, as long as it doesn't ask for a new IP at some point or somebody else takes that IP. So if we see what processes are running in Docker host right here, we're going to use that IP address to run a docker-h command, which points to a different host, and a PS. The PS command, all that is doing is asking me what Docker processes are actually running on this Docker host. The process will show up here as soon as I flip up my terminal. I will get that up here and show you that we are running our Docker host here. On this Docker host, we have this WordPress latest site and a MySQL. These are two different Docker containers that are actively running on this host. You can see from the WordPress latest, WordPress is running and it's running on port 8000. So if I go back to my web page and I go to that site 10.0.0.70 port 8000 and connect in, you can see that this is the Not So Easy Docker, just another WordPress site. This is a WordPress container they built inside of this. The more difficult hack, the hard hack for the directions, is using a WordPress vulnerability to hack through here and gain access. This allows you to go through several more steps and go through a more complicated process, which was kind of interesting, but I'm not going to address most of this. I was just trying to show you that's here. So I'm running a WordPress website inside of a Docker container, inside of a virtual machine, in VirtualBox on my Mac in order to do this thing. So it's kind of interesting to put all those pieces together. All right, we'll close this out. Our next step here, and we know the processes are running, the next step is to actually kick off a bash process. This will allow us to log in remotely to the machine, and by getting this set up in the background, we can get this running and be able to get this running to connect in the background and see what we're doing. So we kick this off, and this will freeze up our screen because this bash process has to continue to run in the background for us to continue processing. So as we continue our demo, we have already got the bash process running in the background, so now we need to do the docker HTTP to the 70 IP address and run this Ubuntu latest bin bash to connect into an actual Docker container through the remote host. So we'll go ahead and run that on our terminal here, that we have the new terminal set up so that we can keep our other one running in the background. Paste that in here and run that. As you can see, I'm now logged into that Docker container. If I look around, I can see what's running on here. Not much is actually running there. It is a simple Linux machine without much running there. Ubuntu Linux, as you can see from this image that I pulled down. So now, if I want to take a look back at my slides up here, I need to run this chroot/pwn directory, and this is allowing me to redirect the root directory and create my own SSH keys. I can use my SSH keys to then log in without having to actually get a password for root. I can use an SSH key pair to actually connect in. So I'm going to then go ahead and use this SSH keygen pair for an RSA ID and use my MetroState email address on that ID, or on that terminal that's in here in the background. We'll pull that into the front, paste that in. There we go. I'm going to give it the default path for my ID RSA key. I'm not going to use a passphrase so I don't have to remember it later. Simplifies things for all my typing. And then I can go ahead and move to that directory, cd root /.ssh. As you can see in this directory, the authorized key file is there that tells me who actually has access to log into this host for an SSH key. So what I need to do, if I cat the authorized keys file, it's going to show me that there's currently one here just for this containment vulnerable Docker ID, but nothing else. So I will go ahead and append my ID to that authorized keys. And that will give me the ability to log into the server. I'll put this in here. I will rerun that authorized hosts, and because of the way the Docker container is reading things, I can't use my up and down arrow keys. But you can now see that I have this containment vulnerable here, as well as my own ID to be able to log into this Docker host. And so that is set up that way. The other important thing I need to do before I log out of this server is to cat my ID RSA and get that in here, because I need that as the other side of my key pair. So I will go ahead and open up that, and then I will modify that file. Sorry, I'm going to go ahead and modify that file in the background here on a different utility. I'm going to use Atom to just go ahead and save that file. In my Docker video folder, I will go ahead and save this file here, and then I can go ahead and exit. And I just exited as root, so now I am just logged on to the container, which was root on that container, and then I logged into the second container, or the second escalate that, or did the chroot to actually give me access to the SSH keys. So now if I look inside here, I have this untitled file here. I'm gonna copy untitled. Actually, I can't. Yeah, I can. I own this. All right. So one of the things about IDRSA keys is they need to be have very little permissions on them. Otherwise, they won't actually allow you to use them. So only the owner has access to do anything with this. So I will copy the untitled to IDRSA. And that new IDRSA key should be what is available for me to log into that server with. If I go ahead and then use my IDRSA key here and tell it to use my IDRSA here, connect to the root of that actual server, and I am now logged into the vulnerable Docker server itself, the virtual machine, as opposed to the container that I was logged into before. So if I look here where I'm at, I'm in my home directory for root. You can see that, oops, ps-ef. There's a few more things running here. There's Docker pieces running. There's a lot more running on this server than was running on that container I was logged into a minute ago. And if I run my docker ps command, it's going to show me those same Docker containers are running here that I was able to see remotely. So that is essentially the hack of how to get into that Docker piece. Now that we've gained access into the Docker container and the Docker virtual host, that is pretty much the hack I wanted to show you as part of this. There's a few additional pieces I wanted to let you know. So that server is 10.0.0.70, and it's the Docker container is hosting on 2375. So if you click the info link, we can go here and see here. So in JSON, it's going to give you a whole bunch of information about this file, about this Docker container and the setup here. So it's going to tell us what's using a bridge network. It is using local volumes. We're using a backend file system of EXTFS. Just a bunch of information that's all available here. It's the Ubuntu system that we're attached to. It's using an OS type of Linux. Just a lot of information that you can get that's exposed through this API through the very simple info attachment. You can also get a list of all the containers that are running on here. So we had the WordPress one. Its public host is port 8000. We had it's up and running currently. It's been up for an hour. And these other pieces down here, they're all here with the MySQL server, all these other things. If we go back up here, I think this is the ID we need. And then if we go to this, oops, sorry. So if we're going to this site here, it's not going to find anything there. But if I take that container ID I copied out of the previous one and paste that in here, this is going to give me a ton of information about that specific container, which is the WordPress one I was mentioning earlier. It's going to tell me a bunch of different things that are running there. It's going to give me open ports, restart policy, mounted file systems, a lot of config information. So there's a ton of information that's available. And if you notice these different pieces that I was using, these different information APIs I'm hitting. They're on port 2375. Sorry, this other link I accidentally clicked on a minute ago was just basically the API, and this is all the list of information you can get through here. It gives you a whole bunch of different ways to filter that information there. If we go back to our slides, simple way to block this is you can block port 2375 or 2376, which uses encrypted data, so you could block both of those ports on your host and you would not be able to access this Docker host remotely. There's not a lot of reasons to access the Docker host remotely, but a lot of people forget about this and leave it open. Thank you for participating in my learning. I really appreciate the time you took to watch this video.